Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the GSMC Television Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Trey Plutnicki, and I hope everyone's having a good Friday and looking forward to the weekend. This week, I've been watching quite a few shows that took place in high school. Like a lot of Ryan Murphy shows, too. So look forward to a deep dive coming in the near future about all of Ryan Murphy's television, including like interviews and stuff like that. But right now, that kind of brings us to today's topic, which is high school in TV. I recently just finished watching season 1 of The Politician, and I'm looking forward to watching season 2. Though I do kind of wish that season 1 of The Politician started in episode 8 of season 1. I wish they, like 30 minutes into the episode, I was like, oh, this is starting to get good, and it was the end of the season. I was like, what the heck, Ryan? Why aren't we starting here? It's more fun. It's more fun on this side. So anyway, we're going to talk about high schools in TV. And Ryan Murphy has had quite a few forays into high school and television for being a man of his age. He's like 60 or something like that. A couple of those include The Politician. It includes Glee. It includes, he's producing Prom, which is a high school, it's not a high school music, well, it's a musical based at high school, not High School Musical. And I'm sure I can talk about that too when I'm going over some Disney stuff when I'm a little bit later. So first off, we're going to talk about Ryan Murphy's forays into high school, whether that be Glee or The Politician. Then we're going to mosey on to extreme light and extreme darkness in high school. And those topics will be like Disney related, and then also 13 Reasons Why and The Society. And then we're going to talk about Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon, most of its comedies take place in high school because that's what's relatable to its viewer base. And I'm going to be talking about the likes of Zoe 101, of Ned's Declassified, and Drake and Josh. And then finally, if you stick around to the end of the podcast, I'm going to be talking about my own show that I helped create when I was in high school. So if you stick around, you'll hear a couple of great stories about that, and you might also learn something. And if you're in high school watching this, you might be turned into an activist and help start something like this at your own school. So stick around, and let's get started. So let's get on to our first subject of the day, Mr. Ryan Murphy. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with Ryan Murphy. I like his shows, and then I watch a lot of them, and then I don't like his shows. They start off really strong, man. They start off like all of American Horror Story and all of Glee or all of American Horror Story and Glee and The Politician. That starts off so strong and so it's just cool. And then it isn't. I don't know how to describe it. It just isn't. It really isn't. It just gets dicey. But that's not really the subject that we're going to talk about. I could talk about that for literal hours about Ryan Murphy. But let's talk about his high school shows and how he represents high school in his television. So I recently just finished watching season 1 of The Politician, specifically because of this topic. And I think it accurately, I mean, part of my problem is it describes, like, it shows this very preppy public high school, and there is a huge class divide at the high school, and that is made clear in its main character and its main quote-unquote antagonist in the show. So I think it's difficult to talk about in this setting because the premise of the show is just so outlandish, and that is typical to Ryan Murphy's standard. But I think what is problematic in Ryan Murphy's tackling of these issues is he casts people who are in their early 20s, maybe mid-20s, as high school students. And not only does this give an unrealistic representation of not only what it is like to be in high school, like if you're in high school and you're obviously not fully matured, so you're not gonna have like 5 o'clock shadow like Ben Platt does in The Politician, and obviously this might create some sort of dysmorphia among actual high school students that are watching this television. And I know not all viewers look at something as ridiculous as The Politician as a model for what a high school student should look like, but there are people out there that do that. And I think Ryan Murphy has consistently and showed consistency in casting older people as high school students. And he did that in Glee too. Now, when I watched Glee, when I started watching Glee, I started watching it when it came out, which I think was like 2005, 2006. It might have been later than that because they were in. I think most of those episodes were in HD, and I remember watching it like in HD. But he cast people that were in their like early 20s, and when you're a sophomore in high school, you can kind of look young. You know, you can look young and pass for a sophomore in high school and be 20, especially on television, especially with makeup and the whole 9 yards. But the show ran for 6 seasons. And eventually when you're casting people who are like 22, for example, if they're still in the show 6 seasons later and you're filming on a yearly basis, at the end of the show, you're going to be like in college, midway through college, or a senior in high school, and you're going to be 28. You're almost 30. You don't look like a high schooler at that point. So that's where I feel like there's inconsistency sometimes in Ryan Murphy's television is in his casting. And I think it's a gripe that a lot of adults see with his show, specifically Glee. And this problem also kind of compounds itself in The Politician because Ben Platt looks old. The story of The Politician is Ben Platt plays a high school student that wants to become president someday, and he has a plan, and he has statistically he's seen that like all of these presidents went to Ivy Leagues. He wants to win class president to show he wants a squeaky clean record, and the school that he's trying to run for class president in is historically competitive for this type of thing. And it's a premise, to say the least. It is a very gamey premise. And he looks like a 25-year-old, obviously. And some of the people he cast as his classmates do look like they're in high school, and they operate like they're in high school. And like I said, this guy named Rivers, I think is his name, he takes his life very early on in the show, and he becomes sort of a mentor. And oh my God, he looks like he is like 25, 26, and he is supposed to be the same age as all of the high schoolers in the show. So that is definitely something I take issue with in Ryan Murphy's shows that take place in high school. Nextly is something that is a bit more social to talk about in terms of Ryan Murphy's presentation of high school. I think it's clear in his writing, and it's clear in his stories outside of the high school realm, that he believes that the biggest stakes that you can have for a person, or that a person can encounter, are life and death and sex. This is absurdly clear in Glee. If you haven't watched Glee, watch season 1 and 2, and then one episode in season 5. It's very clear that he believes that the biggest stakes and the most drama can be caused by life, death, and sex. And this is true. This is a common thing that a lot of script writing teachers and English teachers teach in their literature, to raise the stakes of something. If the stakes are life and death, that is far more entertaining than a will they, won't they, or something like that. It makes it a more engaging story when there is something that drastic on the line. However, when put into a high school scenario, obviously if you're going to make a TV show, you need to have some extraordinary circumstances. However, life, death, and sex is not what high school, in my opinion, was. It was kind of like, for me, high school was more like, am I going to stay awake for the day? Or I can't wait to get to gym so I could start running around and not be judged, because I used to run around a lot in the hallways. That was always fun. Let me talk about this for a second. I used to run around in the hallways because it is unequivocally faster than walking, and it gives me more time once I get to my seat, not only to catch my breath because I was just running, but also gives me more time to just sit and decompress. And why meander somewhere when you can get somewhere as fast as humanly possible? So I think about things like that. I would also think about, I can't wait to get to my TV media class. I have this idea for a project and stuff like that. I did not think about women all that much. I did not think about life and death. There were not nearly as many death threats flying around in my perspective, and I feel like I had a pretty standard run-of-the-mill high school experience. And definitely there were not any pregnancy scares that came up at my high school, and certainly not as much as there is in Glee, and there is certainly not as much murder at my high school than there was in The Politician. Obviously, the stakes are much higher because, once again, it is a television show. However, I don't think murder and death and like life and sex needs to be integral in characteristics. For example, Jessica Lange's character, obviously all the acting is brilliant in the show. I don't really need to talk about it. But most of the women in the show are defined by their appearance, really. They're defined by their sort of relationship to men. And I made a joke where where Ryan Murphy has a binder. The binder has 3 sections. It's stereotypically attractive blonde women. It is white blonde women, stereotypically attractive white brown-haired men, and then the misc category. And he just pulls out from his binder and just sees what happens. So I think that very accurately describes Glee's casting, and I think that accurately describes The Politician's casting. And that's not necessarily a problem, but it kind of gets it. It's a little hard to get behind some of the premises when everyone is just beautiful across the board, because it is a bit unbelievable to see so many people and so many kids at a high school be that pretty. And that also brings me to the next point. When there's sex in a high school show, it not only signals to like the adults that are watching that it's okay to sexualize women and sexualize men, but it also signals to high schoolers that that's what it's about. Whenever you're watching some of these romantic scenes between 2 characters on the show, it hurts to realize, not necessarily hurts, but it's distracting to realize that at the end of the day, these are all people that are underage and under the age of 18, especially in a circumstance where I'm sure they're seniors and I'm sure they're 18 or something, but it is a bit creepy. And I feel like Ryan Murphy gives himself the okay because he casts older people, but it feels a bit creepy when a older man canonically in the show is shown romantically with a woman who is under the age of 18, presumably, or 18 years old, but nevertheless still in high school. But that's it about Ryan Murphy. Next up, we are going to be talking about the extreme light and the extreme darkness in TV. And if you stick to the end, you'll hear about my very own experience of television in high school. So stick around and we'll be right back.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the GSMC Television Podcast. Once again, I am your host, Trey Plotnicki, and now let's get into the literal nitty-gritty. I talked a little bit about Ryan Murphy's obsession with sex and death, and so let's talk about some lighter subjects. So let's move on to High School Musical, a perfect contrast. Now, in terms, I am a musical theater major. I like musicals. I enjoy them, and I liked High School Musical. I liked High School Musical 2. I have not seen High School Musical 3. And while we're talking about television, I know this is a movie, quote unquote, but it was made for TV, so I give myself a pass. I like High School Musical. It was influential for its time. I believe it led to a historic and very dynamic shift in musical theater creation as a whole. If we look back, I say this a lot, if we look back at High School Musical and its place in history, we can see that the very next musical that won a Tony at the Tony Awards was Spring Awakening, which is a show, a pretty edgy show that has rock music that is a coming-of-age story. And a story about teenagers exploring what it means to grow up. And I think that is very telling as to who was engaged with High School Musical. Because naturally, when you see a musical, you see something that you like, you do some digging and you explore. And if you know teenagers, if you've ever met a teenager, you'll know that maybe the first thing that they're going to go for is something that is a bit alternative and a bit off the beaten path. So I think it's super interesting that Spring Awakening won right after High School Musical was released. High School Musical and its portrayal of high school as a whole, you know, it's fine. Obviously, like, liberties are taken with high school in a movie format, because you can't really encompass a full high school experience in an hour and a half, especially in a made-for-television musical. But I think it does a pretty good job of nailing down that, sincerely, you can have just run-of-the-mill high school drama and make it fun and engaging. You see that in songs like Stick to the Status Quo, where we find that kids should stay in their lane and not necessarily explore too far out of that. We see that with Troy, a basketball player wanting to be a part of the Spring Musical. And we see that with Gabriella, who is a science nerd, and she wants to be a part of the Spring Musical. This is actually a similar situation to what happened at my high school, and it got a similar kind of like uproar. It was my junior year of high school, and we were doing Pajama Game, right? And all the stereotypical theater kids were like, "Oh my gosh, I wonder who's going to get it." And obviously, as you do, you precast the show with who you have in mind. And what ended up happening was the two leads were people who were in choir. And were not necessarily, this was their first time doing the school musical. And this obviously rustled feathers. It didn't rustle my feathers because I don't care. Whoever did the best should get the part. But I think it's very interesting that they decided to pick something that is bar none realistic. One thing that I like to talk about with High School Musical 2, another fun fact, High School Musical as well, not High School Musical 2, is Troy, Zac Efron, did not sing in the first High School Musical. Well, he sang kind of, but it was somebody else. Somebody else did his vocals because he wasn't like a trained singer at the time. And I thought that was really interesting. And then he finally learned how to sing for the second one, and he did all of his own vocals for the second one. And now he's like a superstar and known for doing musicals and stuff, like Greatest Showman and all that. So I think High School Musical does a good job portraying a high school setting. I think High School Musical 2 expands on that. I think they explore summer vacation. Critically talking about High School Musical, I love it. They explore summer vacation, and that's not something that's normally explored all too much in like on TV or in film. I think the concept of a high schooler's summer vacation is telling about what their class, their social class in society. A high schooler that wants to take their summer vacation to work, for example, rather than vacation, might be in a different, those two subsets might be different in class. And we can see that in Sharpay, just sitting by the pool at her own spa, talking about how fabulous she is. And we can see that and Work It Out with the rest of the gang working in the kitchen, trying to earn some spare change at this resort. Now, High School Musical was very influential, and I do think it does a good job of capturing a more typical high school experience. High School Musical, the series, is revolutionary at capturing a realistic but completely outlandish high school experience. It is so unbelievable in its attempt of satire and its I can't think of the word. It's satire and it's realism on top of that, to the point where I don't quite know what genre it's in. I mean, it's a musical. They do original songs. I think there's at least one original song an episode, and it borrows from high school, like songs from High School Musical. One of my favorite parts okay, let me actually go back and explain what High School Musical, the series is. So High School Musical, the series is sort of structured as a biopic or a documentary about East High I think it's in Provo, Utah. It's about East High and the actual students that go to East High, and they are put on High School Musical at their school. They see it's fitting. This new woman leads the drama department, who was an extra. She said, she was an extra in High School Musical as like a cheerleader or something like that. She was a cheerleader in high school, but it's later found out that she was just an extra in the stand. She didn't actually do any dancing, and that's used to blackmail her. So it's really a work of art, and it follows these two people named Ricky and Nene. Ricky, once again, decides not to stick to the status quo, and he is definitely an outsider that decides to audition for the school musical. Nene is an outsider in the musical space, and also they introduce outsiders once again in the musical space with a transfer student, with a same-sex couple in high school. I think it's Disney's first on-screen, official same-sex kiss that happened in High School Musical, the series, which is super cool, and also just bonkers that it made history that way for what the show is. In terms of its representation of high school, I think it does like I said earlier, a really, really good job. Everything feels, all of the romance, instead of feeling gratuitous, feels intimate and soft, obviously, because all these kids live with their parents and don't have tons of money Ryan Murphy. So you're able to kind of have a more nuanced approach to what a relationship means in high school. The catalyst of the story is Nene posts a video on Instagram to say that she loves Ricky, and Ricky doesn't reciprocate right away. Instant conflict. And then he figures out as he goes on, he's like, oh man, I made a mistake, and this guy named EJ is now Nene's boyfriend, and he's like, oh man, I need to get Nene back. I actually do love her. I just was afraid or whatever. And EJ is like a total psychopath. I think most people that are in the show, like in the cast, are psychopaths. It is a cast of complete and utter sociopaths. EJ like steals Nene's phone and like reads through her messages, and like he's like a truth teller at some point on his like story, and he gets tons of views, and he's like super upset. There's like this scene where like Ricky found out that his parents were getting a divorce, right? Nene found out something equally as tragic as that, and then this really sad music is playing, and this guy named EJ is looking at his phone and seeing his follower account go down. And we're also, I mean, to add to the satire, like they want us to feel the same way, I think, or they wanted it to be like a moment where it's like, this is funny, or they wanted to like break the ice. It's so unclear as to what it's trying to say, and it's hilarious. So I like these shows a lot, and I didn't leave myself enough time to talk about The Society and 13 Reasons Why, and I don't think I want to talk about them for too long because I don't like those shows. So let me go into 13 Reasons Why, since I know just a little bit, since I know more about it than I do The Society. The Society, I watched like 3 episodes and gave up on it because I felt like it was just dramatically unrealistic. Society is like a Lord of the Flies type thing, and even though sci-fi by definition is unrealistic, this took it to the next level, and I don't really like the show. So 13 Reasons Why is a depressing show about suicide, and I don't think it tackles suicide in a sensitive way. I toured the Southwest of the United States with a Shakespeare company teaching kids theater and stuff like that. And the play that we were doing was Romeo and Juliet, which obviously explores the topic of suicide. And what 13 Reasons Why does is it effectively breaks every rule that media needs to not break when talking about these sort of subjects. I think there are ways to talk about it where it's blunt and realistic and to the point and no holds barred and showing the ugly truth of what it can do to a student body or a high school as a whole. However, I don't think 13 Reasons Why approaches that in any sort of tactful way. And the seasons that followed, from what I hear, continue to completely just go for shock, like essentially shock value. I think the show is very irresponsible in its principles, and the fact that Netflix continues to greenlight it is, especially after season 1, is just depressing. And if you could tell by the tone of my voice, it's just saddening. So I'm glad I talked about High School Musical for so long, because I don't want to talk about 13 Reasons Why anymore. It sincerely just breaks every rule. The Society, however, I watched a couple episodes a little while ago. It's like a Lord of the Flies type thing, and it's super dark. Obviously, once again, it explores the concepts like I talked about with Ryan Murphy, how Ryan Murphy explores them with death, sex, and life. And just for high schoolers, it's fun to see high schoolers put in that situation, and I think Lord of the Flies did it best with forcing young people to create a society. But I just felt like the pace of the show was super slow, and there wasn't really much to think about or explore with the show. So I stopped. Teach yourself that, by the way. Teach yourself to just stop watching something if you don't like it. The sunk cost fallacy is very real, and it will help you to know what that means when watching television. If you don't like something, stop watching it. Don't wait for it to get better. So I would like to hear your thoughts on those types of topics, the extreme light and the extreme dark, things that like move towards the ridiculous. Honestly, feel like they have a better portrayal of what high school, like being in high school, is like. So what we're going to talk about next is we're going to talk about Nickelodeon and some of its high school-based shows, such as Ned's Declassified, Zoe 101, and Drake and Josh. And if you stick to the end, I will show you and share with you what I did in high school that I would classify as top-notch television. So stick around, and we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the GSMC Television Podcast. I am your host, once again, Trey Plutnicki. And now we're going to talk about Nickelodeon and its foray into high schools. So let's get started with Ned's Declassified. I love talking about this. I just love specifically Nickelodeon's forays into high school because they're always just so ridiculous. And I do think Ned's Declassified has the best representation of high school of the shows that I've been talking about so far today. I think Nickelodeon's single camera sitcoms, like Ned's Declassified, like Zoe 101, I feel like they do such a good job at displaying humor and displaying their subject matter with such honesty and with such heavy-handed metaphor. I think Zoe 101 teeters a little bit further towards the drama end of the spectrum than it does a comedy, though it is still a comedy. I feel like Ned's Declassified is really a work of art in terms of its subject matter and in terms of how it tackles the metaphor of high school. For those of you who don't know, Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide follows a high school kid named Ned, who has made a composition book called Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, where he goes through the survival guide and he shares his tips that he has learned in high school. Now, when I saw the show, it actually did inspire me to create my own school survival guide. I wish I had it. I wish I had it today. But I was like, oh, what are my rules in high school? What are the fun lessons that I've learned in high school? And none of them were really remarkable and profound as Ned so accurately portrays. It follows two of Ned's friends. It follows Ned and two of his friends, Ned, Cookie, and oh man, I can't remember her name. 1 second. We're gonna find out her name. Sorry, I bumped the mic for you guys. Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide. Man, I wish I could remember their names. Has been a second. oh man, these names. Jennifer Moseley. I knew it was like Mo or something like that. But they, oh man, the show just does such a good job. Specifically, I think it does a really good job tackling, like I said earlier, the metaphors. Sometimes the show portrays the school as a jungle. And while ridiculous and the costumes and the makeup are all sort of outlandish, it feels like that sometimes. And I think seeing it play out like that is informative to a high school student that is going through this. The show ran for 3 seasons, 54 episodes, and I think it handily encapsulates the high school experience. Now, if I may mention, the show does take place in middle school, but my point still stands. I think it's, once again, its use of metaphor is very poignant, and its ridiculousness is seated in honesty. And I think the writers did a really fantastic job and probably actually talked to kids, unlike Ryan Murphy, who I think just... just is, oh man, I think he's just imagining himself as what he would do if he was a high schooler, and that's just horrible. Now, let's talk about some actual high schoolers. Zoe 101. Zoe 101 portrays a boarding school in California, I believe. It follows the likes of Zoe, Logan, Chase, Michael. A bunch of fun, generic white people names. Well, Michael is definitely not white. It's a great show. It's once again takes place in high school. It does take place in a boarding school, but it kind of once again touches the line where it's like this feels like a class divide. It's hard to relate. Once again, it's nice to imagine what it's like to be a high schooler and like be on your own, like have a sense of individuality, have a sense of freedom, because that's not something that people stereotypically get, especially in America, until they're in college. They don't get that sort of away from parents' freedom to explore what it's like to be an individual. They need to wait for that. But the idea of exploring that while in high school and also exploring that with like kind of genius types is fun. Now, I don't think everybody in Zoe 101 is a genius, but I do think that they touch on people that are generally exceptional. In terms of like high school sort of dynamics and stuff like that, I think it does a fine job. I think it does a really good one of the better jobs I've seen it do is it shows capability that men and women can be friends. and I think that that concept is a bit lost in a lot of these shows. It feels in Ryan Murphy's shows, it does a decent job in Ryan Murphy's shows that shows men and women don't need to be romantically involved with one another in order for the relationship to be valid. I think a lot of Nickelodeon shows in particular shows just men and women together or boys and girls as friends. And I think that is important for people to see. It not only does it not perpetuate the heteronormativity that we see a lot in television and film and stuff like that, but it also allows us as a society to kind of think outside of our pants, especially when we were younger. I do think that is very important. I do think, especially in shows that take place in high school, there doesn't need to be a romantic interest. Sometimes you can just have a fun show where you're not thinking about like crushes and stuff like that. I will say Ned's Declassified did take on crushes and things of that nature quite a bit, because that, I mean, obviously these are hallmarks of every high school drama, but Ned's Declassified also didn't really hang on those subjects for all too long. They maybe showed up for an episode. They weren't like entire season arcs. And the show, in its beginning, centered around a friendship between Mose, Ned, and Cookie. Two men having a platonic relationship with a woman. And I think that's fantastic. Good for Ned's Declassified. Zoe 101 still does that, but obviously when parents and adults are not around, it is, trickier to not touch on that subject because high schoolers do what high schoolers do. And I need to pause for a second and talk about Ned's Declassified once again. I just remembered the teacher that was on the robot is very telling of how schools of how classes are being taught now. That was ahead of their time, wasn't it? Anyway, I do think Zoe 101 does a good job of portraying high school, albeit in a circumstance that not many people are familiar with, myself included. I would say that it does a better job of showing what a college is like if everyone was super immature. And to be fair, all of them are probably college age and were college age at the time of filming. And finally, we talk about the granddaddy of them all, Drake and Josh. Now, I think where my problem with Drake and Josh is, and I don't have many problems, but where my problem is I believe it began to get kind of fuzzy as to if they were still in high school or not, and why they were still at home. So I was like, shouldn't you guys be in college? Like, Josh is a pretty smart dude, and Drake is so, like, shouldn't he be touring or something if you want it? Like, he has a band, right? So I think that was one of, oh geez, sorry, excuse me. Oh man, it's happening again. I just had a lot of chips and salsa and then a lot of water. So I was filling up with the carbs and then I was filling up with the water. It's just a gassy nightmare. So Drake and Josh does comedy in a way that I don't think any Nickelodeon show since has done comedy. It's funny, it's slapstick, the writers are genius. They knew that they had the talent to accomplish this. Josh Peck is a genius, a comedy genius, and I stand by that. And Drake is the perfect, like, straight man sort of foil to Josh's insane person. Megan also adding into the fray, and it's just like a perfect mix of vaudevillian comedy. This is a 3-camera sitcom, and I think it's Nickelodeon's best 3-camera sitcom. Though I appreciate the artistry of single camera, like Ned's Declassified. I believe the importance of it is placed on the director for a single camera sitcom for having a overarching vision. In Drake and Josh and in 3-camera sitcoms, I believe it is more of like a staged play. So the performers really need to shine. And I think Miranda Cosgrove, I think Drake Bell, and I think Josh Peck, I think they all did just a fantastic job creating a few really good seasons of children's television. In terms of how they portrayed high school, I think they portrayed it just fine. The show didn't really focus too much on high school other than the fact that they were high schoolers and they were just working, they were living together, they were brothers. It showed platonic male love, which is one of the first times I've ever seen, like, I think on TV, seen like two men love each other and like hug at the end of most episodes, and like the phrase "hug me, brother" shows up in my dreams. So I just think that's also super interesting, and I wish that was something that's more explored in like early television, or like not young people television. That's what I meant to say. Overall, I think high school in Nickelodeon shows is really well portrayed. I think comedy is built upon honesty, and the metaphor of some of the stuff that is used, like the metaphors used in Ned's Declassified, are as important to kind of articulating and feeling what it's like to be in high school for a kid as some hyper-realistic stuff, like the issues that happen the issues that Ryan Murphy tackles in Glee. I think both of those are as equally as important to a young person, because young people aren't adept at articulating their feelings very well. I'm certainly not, and I'm 23 years old. So it's helpful to have be able to find the words of what you're feeling and what you're going through. And I think Ned's Declassified, I think Zoe 101, and I think Drake and Josh, in its absurdity, manages to hit the sweet spot of theater and realism. So I greatly appreciate that. So next up, if you don't mind sticking around, we are going to talk about This Week in Riverdale. This Week in Riverdale. TWIRD for short. It is the television show that I had a hand in making and that I was in most episodes of. So if you stick around to the end, I'm going to share a few stories from that. I'm going to share with you what it was like to kind of participate in this experiment, if you would call it that. And then we are going to talk about maybe some stories that I have from high school. So stick around, and we will be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the final segment of this episode of the GSMZ Television Podcast. I am your host, Trey Plotnicki, and today we're going to talk about something very near and very dear to my heart, like we usually do. We are going to talk about This Week in Riverdale. This Week in Riverdale is a public access television show that I had a hand in creating when I was in high school. This includes filming, this includes editing, this includes producing, this includes all facets of a normal television show. I had a hand in making this. Now, this is part of a class called Advanced Media Project, so it's a senior year, like honors television media class, where you produce the show called This Week in Riverdale. The school I went to was Riverdale High School. It was, bar none, probably one of the best television acting anything experiences in my life. And I say this as a 23-year-old man, a graduate of college. It has taught me more about the medium of film than I think the TV film class I took in college did. What that class taught me about film. I have a couple anecdotes about the show, but first let me give you a rundown about what exactly the show, how it came to be, and also what changes were made to it when my class came in and started making the show. So originally the show was supposed to be like a news update type show. It was a desk show. There were 3 segments usually, and the class was divided up into 2 teams so we can more effectively make a weekly show. The people at the desk would introduce the show. They would introduce each segment. They would introduce the interviews, people of interest, and then they would segue in between. And some of the segments would be like news segments or funny skits and sketches, and that would be it. That would be the show. And that's how it originally started. It did originally start as primarily a news-based show. Hence, desk segment and all the desk segments. And my high school had a pretty sophisticated television studio in its school, which was like the first television studio of its kind in high schools, like in New Jersey where I reside. It was a very educational experience, and it began as sort of like a how-to for people diving into the medium of television. So that was the year before I started. That was season 1 of This Week in Riverdale. And then season 2 of This Week in Riverdale came about, and we had a lot of people that were into comedy. We had a lot of people that were into more artful approaches to the television medium. Stuff like episodic series, recurring segments, things of that nature. The show more so turned into more of a sketch show and more of a storytelling show than it did a news show. This turned out to be probably the best thing that we could have done. People in the school were waiting for each episode to come out every week. The people on the show, the people in TWIRD, they sort of became micro-celebrities in the school. Now, this isn't like to pump myself up. I'm not giving a unrealistic representation, I feel, of what the show meant to the school. But it was interesting to be recognized by people that you don't really know, that are like 3 years younger than you, or in the middle school that was right next door. Now, a couple anecdotes about the show. The first anecdote I would say is one of like a cautionary tale, I guess, but it also taught me a lot about what it meant to produce content. There is a Catholic high school that is right next door to my high school in the neighboring town. It's called Bergen Catholic, and it is the subject of ridicule among people that went to my public high school. They would they were often better at sports than us. They were often targeted as sort of jerks and dweebs. The voice crack. I'm still in high school, by the way. And we made fun of them a lot. So I finally decided to make fun of them publicly on the television show that had about like 1,000 weekly viewers or so. What I said, the piece that I had made was how to be a Riverdale student. And I said that in order to be a Riverdale student, one of the hallmark rules of being a Riverdale student is to hate Bergen Catholic. And in the piece, I portrayed a Bergen Catholic student getting, or someone wearing a Bergen Catholic sweater getting, like, pushed into a locker and, like, casually bullied and called a traitor. And in hindsight, maybe this is severe. Maybe this tackles a problem that I wasn't equipped to handle. But at the end of the day, it's funny. We were punching up. Nobody was hurt. Like, nobody's feelings were hurt in the making of this video. It was harmless jab, a completely harmless jab back. What I then found out was that the principal of Bergen Catholic was getting phone calls from parents at Bergen Catholic saying, "You shouldn't be portraying our students that way. You shouldn't be making fun of students that way. It's not nice to bully people, yada, 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 yada." And the principal called me into her office. She told me all of this was happening. I thought I was going to be in a lot of trouble. I really did. I thought this was going to be the end of my television media career as I know it. But what it turned out was she said, "So we're getting these complaints. The principal of Bergen Catholic called me, and I don't care. Keep the episode up. It's funny." And I was like, score. So that taught me the valuable lesson of if you're going to have critics when especially when you're making comedy, you're going to have people who don't necessarily think that your comedy is funny. But at the end of the day, it's comedy is subjective, and if you're punching up, you shouldn't have to bend over to the status quo. On the topic of comedy, something else that we did in like This Week in Riverdale class, so to speak, is we created our own comedy club in the school. we made this thing called Media Geek Comedy Club. I made it with my friend Buzz and my friend Ed, and we started a underground comedy club in our television studio. It seated about 35 people, which was more than enough for the people that wanted to come to see 18-year-olds do stand-up comedy and a little bit of improv, which is just horrible to think about. And we put on weekly shows every Wednesday at lunchtime. People gave up their lunchtime. People ate lunch while they were watching us, and we tried out like 5-minute sets every week. It was a ton of fun. Sometimes teachers joined in, sometimes not just the three of us that created the club joined in as well. They just wanted a chance to perform and see if they can do it, give it on for a try. I met some of my best friends doing the Media Geek Comedy Club. It was fantastic. I got this cool sticker. I got this cool notebook that I put the sticker on, and it was with the sticker, it was properly adorned as my comedy notebook, with that Media Geek Comedy sticker put right on the front cover. Those were fantastic times. And it began to make me think, because I had talked about this week in Riverdale with other people that I have met in life and in theater and in my talkings of television. And it begs the question, why don't other high schools do that? I understand not every high school is going to have the funding that Riverdale had. And the funding was rare for the media club, and it was only supplied because the principal really believed in the product that we were pushing. And she pushed for funding for us, which is rare in a arts-based club. And I'm actually worried because the principal just retired, and they're trying to find someone new, and I'm worried about the future of the media club as a whole and Torrid as a whole because of its funding. But I'm curious as to why other schools don't do that have these types of programs. Not only is it easy to do, but it's also, it teaches important skills about writing, about storytelling, about crafting a narrative, which I guess fits in with storytelling, about film, about how to use a video camera, which is in all of our pockets. So if you feel like you want to make something, you could just use the camera that's in your pocket. Everybody has a smartphone nowadays. So I don't understand why some schools they're not pushing for this sort of thing. I would love to find out if a school was doing something similar to Tword. And I put this video out there, and I put this podcast out there rather. And I talk about this because I want to find, I've been searching far and wide for people who are making the videos that I was making in high school that had a similar high school experience where they were forced to critically think and forced to be creative in class. If you didn't have an idea for a week, that sucks. You need to make one up. When you lack inspiration, these classes force you to create technique in curating ideas, which I think is the most valuable skill. Because any Dumbo can have inspiration and then do something. But it takes a true craftsman to have zero inspiration and create a product of the same quality. And I think that class taught me to do exactly that. So I want to find some of these other public access shows. I know those public access shows exist out there, but I want to find something of the same caliber of This Week in Riverdale. I want to thank you guys for listening to this podcast today. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the GSMC television podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you could please so kindly subscribe, that would help us out a lot. And if you want to do something a little more generous with your time, you could also leave us a review if you like this episode. If you made it to the end and you thought what I had to say was funny or engaging or thought-provoking, please leave a review and share your thoughts on that. Also, if you wouldn't mind, just search GSMC in your search bar, and you could find us on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on all social media sites. And if you would like, you could also find other podcasts in the network. So once again, I greatly appreciate you guys listening today, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday for another Hot Doc Tuesday. Thanks for listening. See ya.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.